Welcome back to Cheddar's Opening Bell. New York Times bestselling author Mitch Albom is out with his latest offering, a serialized story called Human Touch that has a message of hope set in our current time during the coronavirus pandemic as this historic moment is still happening. Albom wrote the story in the present, 1 week at a time, as we're all still living it. Joining us now is Mitch Albom, author of Human Touch. Mitch, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Could you tell us a bit about this story and what motivated you to write it?
What motivated me to write it was I live in Detroit, and Detroit was extremely hard hit early on by COVID-19, and I wanted to do something to help my city. And the fastest way I thought that I could raise money, since I write books for a living, was to write one that I gave away for free in exchange for people hopefully making donations to our city here in Detroit. And so I started to write this story, Human Touch, which basically is based in a small town in Michigan on one street corner with four families in the four different houses on the street corner, and how they kind of go through the virus. And I was sort of writing it in real time, and I wrote it 1 week at a time, put it up, offered it for free for people to download. Audible got on board, and people could download the audio of it as well, and then just hope that people's good nature and good hearts would make donations. And it turned out that they did. We raised quite a bit of money with it.
Oh, where did that money go? I know it went directly to your community in Detroit, right?
So I operate nine charities here in Detroit under an umbrella called Say Detroit, and amongst them we have a medical clinic, rec center, and things like that. So we were sort of positioned well to put this into effect, and the money spread out over all kinds of things, everything as simple as PPEs, first responders, meals, and things like that, all the way up to actual testing centers. In fact, we operated testing centers here in the city of Detroit, the first ones that people could walk up to, because many people in Detroit didn't have cars to get up to the one testing center they had for a while, where you had to drive in. So we were literally the first ones to open testing centers where you could walk in, and we found that sadly, early on, we were getting between 30 and 40% people coming back who were positive with COVID-19. So we know that the project did a lot of good in that regard, because it notified a lot of people who had the virus that they did, and they were able to distance from other members of their family.
I want to mention I'm a really big fan of yours, Tuesdays with Maury. One of my favorite books. It actually really impacted my life. I'm wondering about this writing, just this serialized story. You say you wrote it week by week. What was that process like? Did you know how it was going to end when you started
It was harrowing, and I definitely do not
it?
recommend it to anybody who wants to write a novel. It's really, really tough. People were asking me how the thing's going to end, and I was only a week ahead of the people who were reading it. So every Friday, I would have to turn in that week's installment, and then people were reading it the following Friday, and I was working on the next one. So the way that you get about that is you set up an environment that is flexible. You don't make it so plot oriented that you could get lost in the middle. So the environment was this street corner in a small town in Michigan. There's a doctor's family, there's a pastor's family, there was a Chinese American family, there was an older person who had a business family. And I knew with those characters in it, I would be able to sort of adjust week by week as to what was happening with the virus. And I ended up working in a lot of things that happened in real life. Like here in Michigan, there was a militia that sort of rose up and would go to the Capitol and protest about the whole thing. I ended up working that plot line into the story. There were other things that happened with the virus and developments with the knowledge about it that I would work in week at a time. But at its core, I wanted to write a story about hope, and I didn't want people to just be depressed by reading, a novel about coronavirus. You could go outside and and be depressed. So I had this 8-year-old Haitian boy who lives in the neighborhood who was somehow immune to catching anything, and he becomes the human touch factor. He starts going around to people who get the virus and allowing them to hold him and hug him and just have that human touch connection. And through him, there's sort of a little magical event that takes place, and he ends up being kind of the key to solving the whole problem. So I want people to know that human touch ends positively and with hope. It's not a oh, we're all going to get sick and some of us are going to die story. but I wanted ultimately to inspire people.
I'm actually on chapter 6 right now, and it's interesting because especially as a journalist, I'm reading so much about coronavirus, but of course it's just news stories and it is quite depressing. I have found this to be pretty comforting. What has the reaction been from readers?
Oh, it was astonishing. I mean, I really didn't know. I've never tried anything where you just put a novel up online and let people read it. And first of all, people really appreciated that it was free at a time when money is tight. I think they appreciated having something new to read that they didn't have to pay for. And in return, they ended up making a lot of donations, and we raised well over $700,000 just from $5 and $10 contributions from people. There wasn't anybody with some massive huge amount of money. It was just readers around the world, and now it's been picked up in other countries, and I was contacted by publishers in those other countries, including Brazil and other places, parts of Asia, parts of Europe. And they also said, can we run it? Can we translate it? Can we run it? And I said, sure. And I ended up saying, why don't you just keep the money that you raise and do it in your country? I thought Brazil was very hard hit, for example. I didn't think it was right for Brazilians to be sending money to Detroit. They can help one another in Brazil. And so it's been picked up around the world. And yeah, if you want to get a lot of readers, just put something up for free. That's usually a pretty good formula, I'm finding.
And I do want to switch gears quickly, and just ask you about this op-ed that you wrote in the Detroit Free Press. It was about this rise in anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic statements and posts that we've seen from some athletes that just haven't really sparked a lot of outrage. And you write, quote, anti-Semitism doesn't cause the same fury as other prejudices. There's rarely as loud or sustains an outcry when a synagogue is attacked or a Jewish person is killed for his faith or the entire Jewish population is slandered. Why do you think that is? And why is the op-ed you wrote just such an important message to get out right now at a time when we're seeing the Black Lives Matter movement and just people really aware of systemic racism and other issues?
Well, I think to answer the second part of what you asked, I think if we're going to be in a heightened sense of awareness, and that's good, to be sensitive to one another, that has to go across the board. It's not just one group, and never has been one ethnic group, one racial group that has been discriminated against, and nobody else. And so when these things were happening, and thankfully they haven't happened too much recently, but there were several of them going on in the news when I wrote that piece a couple months ago, by athletes who were jumping on board with some things said by Louis Farrakhan and other things that were just plain out anti-Semitic. Whether they realized it or not is no more or less forgiving than when people make racial statements and didn't realize it or not. But to answer the first part of your question, why? I suppose it's because anti-Semitism is really the oldest form of bigotry in the world. I mean, it goes back thousands of years, and some people don't realize that Jews over the years have been accused of everything from causing the bubonic plague to, of course, the death of Jesus to many other things, and they've been persecuted over the years, over the centuries, wherever they have been. And not to mention, of course, there's still people walking around with numbers on their wrists that they got in concentration camps. And so when you have something like that, even as recent as the 40s, people shouldn't be allowed to just forget that. Well, anti-Semitism somehow doesn't rank as high as any other form of racism or something like that. So I tried to write a piece that just said, "Hey guys, while we're at it, being kind to one another and sensitive to one another and calling everybody out, let's remember that anti-Semitism falls under that category as well." And I was shocked, to say the least, at the reverberation of that piece. Probably, I've written a lot of columns over 30 years, but that's probably at the very top in terms of how many people responded to it around the world. So maybe I touched a chord.
Yeah, I certainly shared it. Mitch Albom, author of Human Touch, best-selling author as well. Thank you so much for coming on. I want to remind everybody that book's still available online for free, and donations still being accepted.